I feel the need for, well, a review. I mean, Top Gun Maverick is finally being released. I honestly didn't think we'd see it happen, or maybe that the movie even existed. After more than 30 years of service as one of the Navy's top aviators, Pete Mitchell is where he belongs, pushing the envelope as a courageous test pilot and dodging the advancement in rank that would ground him. So I've gone through emotional ups and downs when it came to this movie. When it was announced, my first question was if this even needed to exist. And then once we saw a trailer, I figured this would just be a reboot of sorts, so it's not something to get really overly excited about. And then about a month or two ago, I was watching another movie, and the trailer for this came on, and I got genuinely excited to see it. This surpassed my expectations, and it really blew me away. I was lucky enough to have my press screening at IMAX, so it was an incredibly immersive experience. While most of the regular on-the-ground scenes were presented in widescreen, when the action took to the air, the full IMAX screen was filled with aerial awesomeness. Okay, so I'm going to back up just a bit. The story shows us that after more than 3 decades since the original Top Gun, Pete Maverick Mitchell is perfectly content to be exactly where he is. He's a captain, never promoted, and acting as a test pilot, even though he could be an admiral because of all of his experience. There's still a weight that Mav carries from losing Goose, and it really affects so many of his motivations and relationships. Now, a dangerous mission needs to be undertaken, and of course, the best of the best are needed to fly it, so Maverick is called in to train the young elite. But because of his own issues and demons, it's not an easy teaching assignment. This movie excels at immersing us in the action. Now, when the planes reach stupid fast speeds and the cockpit is shaking terribly, the visuals also shake so that we experience the same sights as the pilots. There are also some scenes where pilots come close to passing out, and the editing uses an effect to have this increasing vignette, as if just the field of vision was becoming more and more narrowed and blurred. Now, the way I'm describing it does make it sound a bit cheesy, but I promise it's not. This happens at the height of some very critical moments, pushing the tension even higher. And the cockpit shots are intense. As the pilots experience the extreme G-forces, I could feel their squirming. As they rocked back and forth, I found myself doing the exact same thing in my seat. The pilots perform some acrobatics that are breathtaking, and they do some tricks that I think are going to leave your jaw hanging wide open. And this also makes for some nail-biting action. The story paints the picture so vividly of how huge the stakes are and how dangerous the mission is that by the time that we get to our actual mission, our anticipation is at a maximum high. And while a lot of the flying that we see is during training, there's still a massive opportunity for mishap and danger, so the anxiety is always elevated. Now, while a ton of this movie is about flying, I also love that we get to see several opportunities for redemption with Maverick. He's got a ton of demons that he battles, and the story plays them out in very emotional ways. And there were a couple of times the story got to me, and I found myself tearing up. Maverick has to confront several areas in his life that have influenced his reluctance to promote within the Navy, and then the way the story handles it isn't rushed, but it comes across feeling natural and earned. When we look at the younger cast, it's hard not to be reminded of the Top Gun pilots in the original. There are the cocky and overconfident ones, those that are excellent but let their flying do the talking, and even some that are timid. It's a good mix of characters, but a couple of them I would have liked to have more time with. Now, I loved the dynamic between Glenn Powell and Miles Teller. They reminded me so much of Iceman and Maverick in the original. Where you have these two of the very best, but their egos and fears threaten to get in the way. And I especially love the dynamic between Teller's Rooster and Maverick. There's huge tension between them, and they both convey the extreme emotion really well. There's a point where Maverick is outside a place looking in, and the internal battle of going in and having a conversation versus walking away, I think it's powerfully captured in his eyes. I loved the score because it has so many of the iconic original Top Gun music. And yeah, it's completely nostalgic, but it also sets the tone right from the very beginning. There's that iconic gong sound that rings and clues us into the fact that we're in for some great flying. The soundtrack is also a really good mix of old and new, pulling in some of the classic songs from the original and then infusing more current tunes as well. And while the songs are great, the score is really what stands out the most, ramping up to grow the excitement as the action increases. There's also some good comedy within this story. Now, not all of it lands. Some of the jokes come across as juvenile and they just fall flat. And even the jokes that do land aren't really the laugh out loud ones, but they certainly amuse. Okay, so you may be asking, is this nostalgia overload? Well, there are many scenes that do use nostalgia to pull on our emotions, but I like that they're also given context. In addition to some still photos that we see here and there around the set, the movie also uses a few flashbacks to help inform or maybe reinforce what's happening in the present. And while the quality of the film in the flashbacks is pretty grainy, it also gives authenticity to those flashbacks. Okay, so what about this? Is it just a reboot of the original? I mean, yeah, there are a ton of sequences that are influenced by the original, but because they are approached in new ways with new and more immersive shots, they stand out as fresh. And yeah, the story does share a lot of key moments with the original, like high speed flybys, beach sports, singing in bars, and even riding on the tarmac on a motorcycle. I mean, some of this is just massive fan service, taking some of the things that were great in the original and making them even more awesome thanks to current technology. But it's a wonderful way to serve the fans. And what's nice, even with the nostalgia, is that if you haven't seen the original, you can still be immersed in the story and have a great time with it. I think there are going to be some key moments that won't hit as hard if you haven't seen the original, but you'll still get the context and understand everything that's going on. So, probably the biggest weakness in this is that we have no idea who the villains are. I mean, it's actually a bit obvious that the story chooses not to name the adversaries in this. It feels like the script did name the country or entity that the Top Gun pilots are going to go up against, but then, because of some political thing, chose to keep it neutral and just say that there are bad guys who want to do some bad things. So we have to go and do this incredibly hard thing with our good guys, and it will be good in the end. So overall, Top Gun Maverick will satisfy both fans and newcomers to the story. Tom Cruise is wonderfully convincing as a man who can't seem to let go of the past and has to fight all the demons that come as a result. The aerial maneuvers and cinematography is nothing short of breathtaking. And when the planes leave the ground, be ready for insane aerobatics and intense high-speed maneuvers. While this does ride heavily on nostalgia and the bad guys are completely anonymous, there's also enough freshness here to put a smile on your face and maybe even a tear in your eye. The score is iconic and resonant, instantly signaling the arrival of anxiety-filled fun. I suggest seeing this on the biggest screen you can to get the full experience, but wherever you see this, catch it in the theater first. This is definitely why we go to the movies. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and a bunch of violence. I give Top Gun Maverick 4.5 out of 5 couches. So what would your call sign be? Mine is Riptide. So if you go to whatsmycallsign.com, you can find out yours. Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.